I'm from Zimbabwe. We have the second largest lithium reserves, but we're at the brink of losing ownership of all of these lithium reserves just because China built a parliament for my country. So if you're saying that you are promoting the sovereignty of nations, of countries, but you're taking our own parliament away, and let's say the airport in Kenya, for example, are you not being hypocritical?
So you've mentioned that China has a no interference policy with other states, and that states should have their own ability to dictate their way of life or their existence. But wouldn't you say China's presence all over Africa is in a way an exercise of some sorts of power, a soft power of sorts, and does that not contradict with the foreign policy of China?
乔治城大学论坛上，津巴布韦学生当众质问高志凯：中国口口声声说不干涉内政，却用建议会换走了我们的锂矿，这不算虚伪吗？全场目光聚焦，高志凯没有回避，而是冷冷回怼：你总统上台前反华，上台后亲华，为什么？因为他知道中国投资最多。不同意，回国问你政府。全场鼓掌。这不是外交辞令式的太极，而是一个看透非洲现实的人，用对方自己选出的总统反将一军的经典战例。
Time to hear from our speakers. Victor, I'm going to start with you. What does China get right in terms of core principles that the rest of the world can learn from China?
Thank you very much, Fima. It's a great honor for me to be here, and greetings to the distinguished audience as well as the other panelists, and equally, if not more importantly, to the distinguished students on the stage. First of all, I think the world we are living in is a multipolar world. If anyone says they want to go back to the unipolar world, it's a mission impossible. For the past 46 years, China has been building socialism with Chinese characteristics. I would say the more important thing are the characteristics. So what are these characteristics? This is really $1 million question. I would say for the past 4 decades or so, China has been put a premium on development. Deng Xiaoping said, development is the hard truth. We believe every country needs to develop, and no country should be complacent. No country should rest on its own laurel or even try to throw a wedge in other countries' development. So stability is very much of an asset, and keeping peace in the world is very much important, and also pushing for free trade and market practice of all kinds should be very important. When we look around the world, China always emphasizes the importance of connectivity, infrastructure. Why? Because we benefited from this. In China, we have a saying, if you want to be rich, build a road. That's why China builds, whereas several other countries are not in the building mode. They probably want to destroy. So I think the choice is very clear. Let's really put a focus on development, stability, peace, and always believe in development as the hard truth and the softer truth and the smart truth. Thank you.
So, Victor, you gave us some insight into the China model. From the way you described how China sees itself and the rest of the world, what ideas could we, or do you think China could export globally?
Well, I don't think China has the truth. Truth is always relative. Some truth works for you, but it may not work for others. I think from the Chinese perspective, several things really are very important. One is that without democracy, there will be no modernization. So China does not oppose democracy. China advocates democracy. But then on the other hand, democracy has no set model. You need to adapt the democracy to your own national circumstances and come up with your own unique system. Now, secondly, we hear a lot about human rights. Human rights are so important, but I think from the Chinese perspective, human rights do not exist in a vacuum. Human rights need to be balanced with human obligations. You cannot talk about human rights without equally talking about human obligations. Therefore, I think the Chinese perspective is more balanced, is more all-inclusive, rather than one-sided. For example, in this August hall, I cannot cry fire. That's not an exercise of my freedom of speech. It's actually a violation of law if my cry results in stampede, for example. Therefore, I think when we talk about all these things, we need to be very careful as to what these labels really mean. Very quickly, the United Kingdom for many hundred years didn't have a Supreme Court. The EU, during its periodic review, found that deficiency, and EU ordered the United Kingdom to set up the Supreme Court. That's why if you go to London, go to the Westminster Square, on the west side of the square, there is a Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. Why? Because United Kingdom built the empire, declined from the empire without a Supreme Court, while Britain had always talked about the balance of power. We need to really know what all these labels are really about and whether you are really delivering and walking the walk while you talk the talk. I think we all need to find a way to serve the fundamental interest of our own people rather than being lectured upon by others and having other values being imposed on our own country. Thank you.
Right, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rod. I'm a fourth-year student at Georgetown, and I want to really expand the discussion further. So, Mr. Gao, you talked a lot about development and how that's a priority for the Chinese government. However, we should move a bit further than just development. What makes successful societies is not just development, but it's merit. The idea that someone can get ahead because they're qualified and they're really good at what they do, and not because of their family or their religion or their tribe. And I believe that the most successful societies, which have been, for example, the United States, have succeeded in comparison to other countries because of that system. Because of the United States, you can get further ahead than if you were in other countries because of your merit. And I just want to really ask you that in China, there's also a big culture on merit. However, it's very top-down, and there's a lot of authoritarianism in China. And in many ways, the meritocracy of the past 30 years seems to be collapsing. The Chinese economy has not developed as much as it should have since post-COVID. So how can you really address those things while ignoring the rights of the individual as is taken in the West, for example?
Thank you very much. I think you are raising a very important question. Without going too much into history, I think China started to decline as a result of the First Opium War, intensified by the Second Opium War and the 1900 incident in China involving 8 countries kind of sending troops to China. And for the last 100 years or so, China experimented with all kinds of models of development. Empire, constitutional monarchy, republic, warlords, for example, revolution of all kinds. Eventually, I think, China figured out a way that China need to go onto its own path. And then before 1978, when Deng Xiaoping bounced back to become the paramount leader, China was engaged in probably the most intensive splitting of the ideological hair. China was locked up in a big box, believing that socialism must be good, must be better than capitalism. But then Deng Xiaoping realized that socialism, that practiced by China, did not bring bread and butter to the table. People were hungry, poverty. By 1978, China probably achieved the highest level of egalitarianism in human history. Everyone was equal, but everyone was equally poor. Let me tell this distinguished audience, there is no fun of being locked up in poverty. And China's mission was to find a way to maintain its political system, which is unique, because Chinese history is unique, but also figure out a way to bring bread and butter to the table, to make sure that China will achieve development. That is why China's roadmap is clear. It's different from anyone else. Whatever China has been doing over the past 46 years may not be able to be done by any other country. But the key commonality is simple. That is, bring your people, uplift your people out of poverty, build roads, set up factories, push the edge of science and technology, and be a leading force for peace and stability. I think in this overall context, individuals will always be important. China could not have achieved all this miraculous transformation of itself if China did not empower the people, enable the people. But the way the Chinese people have been empowered and enabled are different. We always talk about the collectiveness of the Chinese nation together with the individual rights of each person. We always put a premium on family. In China, family is always important. And we refuse to be dictated by other countries when they want to redefine gender, when they want to redefine family. No, we believe the Chinese values are deeply rooted, dating back 5,000 years. We cannot be dictated by other countries.
Afamia.
I would like to challenge Mr. Gao with this question. So you've mentioned that China has a no interference policy with other states, and that states should have their own ability to dictate their way of life or their existence. But wouldn't you say China's presence all over Africa is in a way an exercise of some sorts of power, a soft power of sorts, and does that not contradict with the foreign policy of China?
Allow me to mention one thing. Before China's extensive engagement with Africa, Africa itself is a forgotten continent. That's not what Victor Gao said. That's generally being said by Western countries. Africa, after decolonization, was more or less the forgotten continent. Western countries did not want to engage it for whatever reason. China went in. China treated every African country as brother and sister, and China really invested hugely in Africa. Now, many other countries are talking about engaging with Africa, including the United States, many European countries, India, for example. The more the better, because Africa should not be a monopoly for any other country, not for China, not for anyone else. Africa is for the African people. And the taste of the pudding is always, you should not be a judge yourself. You go to African country and ask them whether they like building a road, whether they like building a gymnasium, etc. That is the only truth, because don't be lectured by other countries about what value African countries should have. The African value will be different from many other continents, for example. The other countries in other continents will need to help the African country to build up their infrastructure, to build their manufacturing capabilities. And that is the only goal for China. China has no colonial objective for African countries. China is so far away physically from Africa. Whatever China is doing the same in ASEAN countries, in Latin American countries, for example. And this is a sign of China's philosophy. That is, if we build our pillars of transformation, we want to share that with you. If we believe building road is the only way out, we help you to build the road.
Carl.
Thank you. My name is Carl Jumbo, freshman student at Georgetown University. My question is simple. Are you not being hypocritical, Mr. Gao? Why I'm asking, you're saying that, okay, in Africa, you are allowing some buildings, some infrastructure to be there. I'm from Zimbabwe. We have the second largest lithium reserves, but we're at the brink of losing ownership of all of these lithium reserves just because China built a parliament for my country. So if you're saying that you are promoting the sovereignty of nations, of countries, but you're taking our own parliament away, and let's say the airport in Kenya, for example, are you not being hypocritical?
Let me be very blunt. Zimbabwe is a great country. You had your election several years ago, and the presidential candidate was very much against China. He's elected as the president, and once he's in his office, he changed his mind, because he knows for sure that for Zimbabwe development, China is the main contributor for the Zimbabwean economic development. If you do not agree with me, go back to your country, talk to your government, and check out over the past 30 years, which country has invested most heavily in your great country. I know Zimbabwe well. China has dealt with Zimbabwe governments for several decades, including your great presidents, for example. And I would say China-Zimbabwe economic cooperation has helped the economic transformation in Zimbabwe, in building up infrastructure facilities, and in building up manufacturing capabilities of your country. That is the truth, if I may tell you. I think that is the only truth. Development is the hard truth. Thank you, brother.
I wanted to go to Mr. Gao one more time. So you said that we're not supposed to be lecturing others and we're supposed to go with our own identity because the truth is subjective from one country to another, right? But at the very least, we talked about the weaponization of human rights. But there are very basic fundamentals when we're talking about human rights, and it has been addressed multiple times. How are you addressing the one-state nation that you are talking about, which is something that was created by us and systems, in comparison to religions and traditions which were by higher-ups that were not created by us? How are you giving importance to one-state nations compared to that?
Thank you very much. When we talk about human rights in the world of today, I think the most important human rights are to protect the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. No country has any excuse to deny the Palestinian people their right of existence, their right to their own country, their right to their own culture. And if anyone comes to you and say, I'm a friend of your country, I'm a friend of Islam, of Muslim countries, etc., but I do not respect the Palestinian people's rights, he's a false friend. That's number one. Now, separately, you quoted J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is my classmate at Yale Law School. I was class of 1993. He was class of 2013. The quote he said is completely agreeable with me. China builds, America should build too. The United States should not just lecture others as if they have the totality of the truth. I think the United States is in a transformative age. It's launching a revolution against itself. This should be something very educational for all of us. I personally hope the United States will become great again 4 years from now. But where is the verdict? The verdict is still out there. We still need to urge our American friends to really work. And development is the hard truth. It applies to China for the past 46 years. It will apply to the United States in the coming 4 years. Thank you.
I want to ask you, Victor, and it's like a 30-second response, really, is from being inside of BRICS as China, does it feel like it's a different kind of world global order?
First of all, BRICS is a megatrend. It's a reality. The size of the BRICS countries' economy combined is larger than G7. Now, secondly, when you have a country like Turkey, which wants to join BRICS, which is a NATO member state, that's very profound. I would say the moment Turkey becomes a formal member of BRICS, that's a major turning point in history. And personally, I'm not a fan of de-dollarization, but I'm completely opposed to weaponizing the dollar or weaponizing the SWIFT system, not only for China's sake, but for all the other countries' sake. We are in the Middle East. Lots of countries are very wealthy. Do you really want to expose yourself to this wanton seizure of your assets, for example, and denying you the SWIFT privilege or using your own dollar, for example? That decision will be made by the individual countries. And I would say BRICS, being a megatrend in the world, is not anti-West. No, it's not promoting de-dollarization, but it is having a mission that is to preserve its own national sovereignty and territorial integrity, making its own flexibility to use dollar or euro or its own currency to settle, and that decision should be made only by the countries themselves, rather than being dictated by any other country. When Donald Trump says, if BRICS want to promote your own collective currency, I want to slap 100% tariff on your countries. Someone need to tell very distinguished Donald Trump that don't weaponize in the dollar, because if you weaponize in the dollar, you...
We'll move on the note of the very distinguished Donald Trump. This
Thank you.
is the part of the show that we call the Majlis.
西方媒体长期把中国诚心殖民者，非洲学生却用西方话术来质问中国。高志凯的反击之所以解气，在于他彻底撕碎了债务陷阱的叙事框架。当学生抱怨失去锂矿所有权时，高志凯点破核心。津巴布韦新总统姆南加古瓦上台前非常反华，当选后改变主意，因为他知道中国才是真心帮津巴布韦发展的国家。 这不是否认问题，而是把问题扔回给提问者，你选的总统都不信这套，你信？更狠的是他对西方非洲政策的嘲讽，中国去之前，非洲是被遗忘的大陆，西方不想碰，中国去了，西方才想起来非洲存在。他搬出数据，中国几十年与津巴布韦历届政府合作，从基础设施到制造业能力建设，去非洲问问，他们喜欢中国修路还是喜欢西方？当美国学生大谈个人权利时，高志凯用100年屈辱史回应，中国试验了所有西方推荐的制度，1978年前实现了人类最高水平的平等，人人都平等，人人都平等的穷。高志凯反复强调，非洲是非洲人的非洲，中国没有殖民目标，中国离非洲那么远。高志凯的每一句话都在解构新殖民主义的标签。你们问中国为何拿走锂矿，他反问你们为何从没问过西方拿走什么？而他那句发展是硬道理，恰恰是对所有站着说话不腰疼的西方精英最狠的打脸。锂矿重要，但路、医院、工厂更重要，而西方几十年没修一条路。